Okay, so this now moves me to our main event for the evening, which is going to be our interview with Melanie Winter. And so I'm going to start by giving an introduction to Melanie. Uh, this was a real treat for us to get Melanie. I want on a serious note, I want to point out that Melanie is currently going through a very serious illness, potentially life-threatening illness, but she still is here with us and still wants to do advocacy work and is still involved in things that go on. Because I tell you this in part, not to invade her privacy as much, because she did give me clearance to say this, but to tell you that she sometimes has voice issues. Sometimes her voice will break while she's talking, and sometimes she gets a little tired. So hopefully this will be all stuff that works, and she'll get excited, and we'll have a good time here. But I want everybody to be understanding that if at some point Melanie gets tired and she has to go or something, we have to cut this off. That's what we're going to do. And if she breaks, her voice breaks, be a little patient with it. I'm exaggerating it because knowing Melanie, she's gonna be a fireball of energy and will be totally fine, most likely, but we'll see. And it should all be good. I want to give you a little bit of a background on Melanie, and then most of it we'll actually talk about in the interview. But Melanie is one of the most important advocates in the Los Angeles region with respect to our watersheds and biodiversity and the larger picture of Los Angeles in terms of the health of ecosystems. She has been very involved as the director of the River Project, and we'll talk a little about that in our interview. But she is also somebody who, quite frankly, is not afraid to ruffle feathers in order to advocate for what is right. And I appreciate that in someone. We have a lot of people who, try to play the political game, and they kind of get lost in the game of incrementalism sometimes. That's not Melanie. She's not going to pull her punches. She's going to tell you, this is why we need to do what we need to do. And she also has the luxury of usually being the smartest person in the room. So she makes that very clear to you by telling you all the stuff that she knows, which is usually a wealth of information. I've learned a great bit of information, a great bit of knowledge I have obtained from just working with her on different projects. And I think you'll enjoy speaking with her tonight. So Melanie, welcome.
That was a lot. Thank you.
Are you able to join us on the video, or is that?
Yeah, hang on 1 sec.
Okay, all good.
Okay, there we go.
So for those who don't know, what's the name of your pooch?
Maisie.
That's right. Yeah. So, and Maisie's often with Melanie. In fact, if you came to our event that we did in November, Melanie was on our panel, our expert panel, talking about native plants that we did in Rio de Los Angeles. And I believe Maisie was with you there, wasn't she?
She's pretty much always with me. Yeah, she's a service animal. So
there you go. Now you can. There's a testament to that. So Melanie, many of you who even do know her as an advocate, and I didn't really know much of this until recently, Melanie actually has a really colorful and interesting background. She was a dancer, and not just like, somebody who, shakes around a little bit. She was a professional dancer, and a really good one, and a really significant one. She was in movies like Chorus Line and Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. She was in Broadway shows. She was a big deal. And she also was a photographer who took photos for movie posters. And in addition to that, she was an actor, and it was in some movies you might see. So you can Google her and you can figure out the rest of that on your own. But this is an interesting background, but less of an interesting background in some ways for a person in Los Angeles, because there's a lot of that here, and you're not as shocked by it because we're sitting in LA. But to go from being that person and having some quantifiable success to being one of the top advocates for the environment in Los Angeles is kind of a hard left turn. So Melanie, for starters, can you talk about how you went from being, in the world of theater and the world of TV and movies and all of that, and today, that's not what you're known for. Today, you're known for being this hardcore advocate for the river and other things with environmentalism.
Yeah. My parents both became ill around the same time with some very different challenges. My mom physically and my dad with Alzheimer's. And I grew up out here, so they were still here, and I was in New York. And with my mom's physical challenges, she was unable to care for my dad, and my dad, they both needed care. So I moved back out to Los Angeles to look after them. And the timing was such that it was sort of the 1-2 punch of earthquake and uprising. And it was just very bizarre to be back in LA after 2.5 decades in New York, and not, in New York, you have public transit that's robust. And I rode my bike 9 months out of the year, and there are parks everywhere. And so being back in LA and in the Valley and having to drive everywhere was really uncomfortable for me. And the business of show is very different here than it is in New York. So it didn't suit me so well. So with also, when I first came back, they were widening parts of the 405. And the way that I saw it was the K-rails had gone up. And my first thought was, oh, good, we're going to finally get public transit over the 405. And then no, so it was like everything.
So this would have been like the early 90s?
Yeah. And lots of more open space. And it was just, it was a lot. So I started, with the time that I had, looking after my folks, but the time that I did have, I started volunteering pretty much everywhere, at a lot of different things, mostly social justice focused, because in New York City, when they, the draft riots is the thing that really spurred a lot of change, both in urban planning and the development of Central Park and all these things that created, made it a more livable city and addressed a lot of social issues. In LA, our response to the riots was just so surface and so bullshit and not looking at underlying causes. And I was so pissed. So I was looking for ways to fit in and make a difference, and got involved with a lot of different organizations and learned a lot about getting engaged in advocacy from a lot of different perspectives, from justice for janitors to tree people, And I got hooked up with Women's Action Coalition, which was an art-focused group, and the Bohemian Women's Political Alliance, which was a bunch of former punk rockers getting involved in activism. Exene Cervinka, Nicole Panter, and through that, went to my first meetings and learned how to address council and, how to organize, and a lot more about the sort of dysfunction of Los Angeles. I remember very clearly going to a council meeting, protesting against a new industrial facility in Southeast LA, and talking very directly about the pollutant loads that were going to be impacting the local communities. And Hal Burnson saying, well, they can always move.
And tell us who Hal Burnson is.
Why did they choose to live here? And the rage that comes with hearing that from who was my council member out in Northridge at the time was just galvanizing.
Right. Yeah, I bet. So was there an actual moment where you said, I'm done with auditioning, I'm done with doing headshots constantly, I'm done with the business entirely, and I'm just going to make this now this advocacy now the primary focus of my professional work? Or was it like a slow creep?
Well, it wasn't too slow, but it was sort of understanding that and having some friends who had also bridged both of those. My friend Megan Oakes, who's Phil Oakes' daughter, for those of you who know who Phil Oakes was. And Megan also had spent time in the theater, and we had a lot of mutual friends, and she had started working for the ACLU and doing all that work. She really sort of held my hand into understanding that the nonprofit world was something viable, and sort of dragged me into doing my first fundraiser to sort of see how that would work. And it was a way to mix the sort of let's put on a show theatrical skills with advocacy, and Women's Action Coalition as well, and BWP as well, helped to sort of see how that would work. But I think maybe it was, excuse me, maybe it was this is weird. I had a vision driving over the 405. Literally, in my head popped an image of tombstones lining the hillsides, and the tombstones were female torsos from the waist to the shoulders. I was engaged in some breast cancer advocacy, partly because of the pollutants, partly because of personal experience. And that image was so powerful, and it was almost like a voice came with it that said, it was like, well, you have to do this. This is the image, and now you must make this so. It felt like such a weight, but at the same time, it was like, but it is so cool. So figure out how to make that happen. And that turned into 3 separate events. One of them was 3 months of going from people's houses all over Los Angeles who voluntarily allowed me to cover their naked torsos in with plaster bandages and make these sort of tombstones out of their bodies.
So
And the other,
you made the reverse and then poured something in the cast you had made.
nope, just the cast. So these were literally just made of plaster bandages that were like breast pieces, front pieces from shoulders to waist. Gotcha. And then we would put them on them, let them dry, and then take them off. And I stored them in a garage in Venice for a while, up at the old Tree People for a while. And the goal was to make about, I think it was 1,100, the number of women who die every year from breast cancer in Los Angeles. So that was happening. And then we did we got bras from women all over Los Angeles, and got the certificate that came with it, the provenance, and held an auction. We auctioned off bras from everybody from Courtney Love to Jack Lemmon's bra from Some Like It Hot to Dear Abby. The event was held at the Playboy Club. We had people, all the sort of performance artists in LA, the sort of underground scene, doing all kinds of topless stuff. And then we got breast implants and had cartoon artists draw on them and sold those as well. And it was all in order to start a breast cancer advocacy group in Los Angeles. And that was just so much freaking fun and exhausting. But that was one of the things that sort of made it like, okay, so this is what I do now. And then I got hired at KCRW to sort of make their Fun to Drive a little less West Side and a little more interesting. And that was fun too.
So now that you moved even more heavily into the specifics of advocacy, do you ever occasionally get the itch to go on an audition or something and go to a play, try to be in a play or something?
No, I used to sort of tell myself that when I got like in my 70s and it was just like, and I got really weird looking and all, decrepit and crony, that then I would go back and do the character actor. I would do character actor bits. I miss it like crazy. I'm still a theater hound. So I miss New York City too.
That's one of the benefits of living here. There's no shortage of roles for every physical type at any moment. And you can argue there's shortage of some compared to others, but I think the point I'm trying to make. All right, let's move on from that. At some point, you became the founder and director of the Ellie River Project. Could you take us from doing the breast cancer awareness and the KCRW work to how you became interested in water issues and what that journey looked like?
Yeah, all of that sort of combined was, I was really kind of burnt and exhausted. It's when you're working for either volunteer or very little, you can really, and you get very passionate, you can really sort of burn out. So I had kind of hit that point, and I got my folks settled in Camarillo, and I had the opportunity to house sit for 6 months in Ojai. Friends of mine were going to do a Sam Shepard play, and they offered me their home. So I was going to move up there and was ready to take off and do that. And my girlfriend, Megan Oakes, asked if I would meet as a favor her friend's husband, who had a nonprofit, and they needed some fun ideas for raising money. And I said, well, I'm not going to be in LA, but okay. And so I had a meeting with Lewis McAdams and Bob Warnock. And I thought they were kind of nuts. Or Bob was very sane, but I thought Lewis was
And
crazy.
tell us who those people are.
Lewis McAdams was the one of the founders of Friends of the Los Angeles River. So they had $20 in the bank. And so I gave them some ideas and told them good luck. And they kind of hounded me after I moved to Ojai, and then asked me to do their cleanup and said they had some money to pay someone to organize their cleanup, and would I just do that? And I could do it from Ojai. Turns out I couldn't do it from Ojai, but I took that job. And on my first day of that job, I went to one of the very first meetings of a new organization that had been founded by Dorothy Green, who was the founder of Heal the Bay. And this organization was focused on watersheds. It came out of an initiative she had started called Unpave LA. So this was the Los Angeles and San Gabriel Rivers Watershed Council. And my job was to go there and find people to give us contributions for the cleanup. But I went there and I heard Dorothy speak. And the other side of the equation, I heard all the government people kind of not speak or speak really carefully about things. And everything Dorothy was talking about made so much sense to me. And the fact that government was so careful and cautious and not quite getting the picture, it clicked for me in my head. And it's a way of systems thinking and approaching things differently. And it made so much more sense to me than let's make a greenway on the river, that Dorothy became my mentor, and everything I did from that moment on was focused on that. And I ended up running Friends of the LA River for 3.5 years and building them up from having $20 in the bank to being very vibrant and moving forward with the first state legislation on the river and fighting to create, running the lawsuits that created 2 state parks on the river and putting money in the state for river stuff and doing all that. And then after that, I just left and started my own organization so that I could focus more on the systems thinking, the whole watershed approach rather than a greenway approach.
And so what ultimately is that difference in terms of how your organization functions versus Friends of the River?
Friends of the River, I mean, they're evolving over time, but for their first 30 years, it really was, the objective was to create a greenway on the river. And the problem with that is the same problem Dorothy identified after her establishing Heal the Bay and having some success. You can only do so much to clean up ocean pollution when you're just standing on the beach and looking out to the ocean.
Right. So your point is you need to be involved in all the causes and the larger political discussion of why this problem evolved in the first place.
Not just the political discussion. It's where is the problem coming from? How does a watershed function? I mean, polluted stormwater runoff gets to the ocean from everywhere. So you can't do what they call end of pipe solutions any more than you can try to have a healthy river by just staring at the river. The river is the creation of all of the land use that drains to it, right? So Unpave LA was a really simple way of dealing with that. One of the fundamental tenets of watershed management is the percent of impervious surface in your watershed is going to tell you how healthy or not your watershed is. There needs to be healthy living soils everywhere. Water needs to be able to interact with soil and plants and get to the groundwater in areas that have groundwater basins. So if you've paved everything over, the more paved an area is, the less healthy it's going to be. So just looking at the beach and trying to, address one output, one outfall, or just staring at the greenway and hoping that you're going to somehow fix that river so that fish can swim in it. Let's work around that concrete. It's not going to solve, you lose the opportunity to solve so many more problems, heat island impacts and habitat and biodiversity and connectivity and healthy soils and carbon sequestration. And, it's just like, why would you just focus on one thing when if you look at it properly, you can start to address so many more interconnected issues. So
now, Now, I completely agree with you, but I'm going to throw a devil's advocate kind of question at you. And the problem with systems thinking, oftentimes, I feel, with respect to being an advocate, is that it's really easy to get overwhelmed with everything when you realize this is something that is all interconnected, and there's not just one problem we can fix, but there are 500 problems that are all contributing to this. And oh my God, what's the point of me doing my one little thing if at the end of the day, all these other things are going to happen too? And so how do you personally reconcile that, number one? And how do you as an advocate deal with it when you're facing those kind of issues systemically in your discussions with others?
Right. I mean, for those of you, listening to this, doesn't that sound like climate change? It's not just watershed, it's a wicked problem. And wicked problems, you have to retrain your brain to think that way. Now, the problem being that government doesn't usually work that way. We think in silos and we're very, disconnected. So it's sometimes challenging to take a look at what that elected official or that department head is interested in and focus, as much as you can on what they want, but also help them to understand how partnerships and collaboration can make their jobs easier and we can get further and it'll make them look better. That, those things sometimes work and sometimes don't. It's interesting doing this for almost 30 years, it's just starting a conversation. It's pretty easy to quickly identify staff in any agency or department that is going to click with you. And a light goes on in their eyes, or they can see an opportunity, or they go, oh yeah, and they'll contribute something, and you can work with that person. And often that person is having a hard time getting along in the job, or they've figured out ways to work around things. But there's almost no departments out there that don't have people who get it. Some more than others, and some, it's hard to find them, but they're there. So it doesn't make it easy, but I think it's a culture shift. And it's not something to say, well, this is too difficult, so, let's work within this fucked up system. I don't find that super helpful. It perpetuates everything. And those things are applicable to so many other issues that we have socially and culturally, right? If you just go along with what it is, you're not going to get the change you need. You're just going to keep slogging along, making tiny progress in the same ways that we've been making tiny progress, and they then claw back. Finding ways to get underneath it to the structural issues is really the big challenge at hand for all of us.
Yeah, one of the analogies that I've clung to that I read somewhere years ago was when you're doing advocacy and you're involved in systems approaches and systems thinking, you need to think of it as a giant mixing board. And at any one moment, you can't move a lot of those levers, but there are going to be some that you have to find, and some of them you can move. And when they get more volume, some of the other ones are going to want to join in, kind of a thing. And so then you can come back to them and constantly being actively going. And as the advocate, you're trying to be involved in pushing all the levers and massaging things wherever you can at any moment as is possible. And so, yeah, it's a big challenge, and you have handled that quite well in the past in many things you've been involved with, and that's something that is a skill that we all could benefit from, learning more about. So, tell me about you mentioned two state park projects. So one of them I want to point out for those of you who are in the room who came to our November event that we did with NCSA, and NCSA executive directors actually in the call tonight too. Lisa Hart, who was one of our guests here previously. That meeting that we did in November was at Rio de Los Angeles, which is one of the parks I believe you're referencing. And that's an interesting park because it's, I believe, the only park that is in existence that is owned by the state or run by the state, but part of it is leased out and managed to the city of LA too. So that is just bureaucracy gone, haywire in terms of what you deal with as an advocate. So could you talk a little bit about how those state parks were fundamental to that vision of improving the health of the river, and also how you dealt with challenges of all those different agencies and all the different, desires that you were trying to balance?
Right. So Taylor Yard, which is what the rail yard was called because of the Taylor family. It's now Rio de Los Angeles State Park with 200 acres there. between the 2 and the 110 along the river, between the river and San Fernando Road. That had been something that Christy Perala, who had done some work with Friends of Los Angeles earlier, and sort of identified as a spot to demonstrate to county and other agencies what watershed management would be. Like, here's a property that is, they've moved the operation, so it's a piece of land whose future is unknown. It's along the river. We could restore some floodplain. So it was sort of like an example. And studies had been done showing what benefits could be derived from treating this land differently, from restoring it to open space, for restoring floodplain. And people had been looking at it, and the community had lost a lot of jobs there. The community was incredibly park deprived. So for me, it was a question of two things: going to community leaders and saying, okay, we've been talking about this, what's the next step? What has been missed? What do we want to do? And then also going to find funding. So going to the Coastal Conservancy initially, they had a pot of money, and I, secured some funding for them to do some additional scientific studies. And then fortunately, Tom Hayden was the senator at the time, and Antonio Villaraigosa was the assembly member at the time, and they had competing park bonds, which then became Prop 12. And working with both of them to ensure that for the first time we could put funding in the bond for the river so that we could advance these. And by working with them, my charge was to identify park space up and down the river that covered everybody's districts, to put together a package, to tour it to legislators, to identify how much it would cost to acquire and develop each of these, what the opportunities and barriers were. So on the political side, that was a lot of work. And in the community side, it was convening community members who didn't always get along, because you've got Glass Hill Park, Cypress Park, Mount Washington, and Atwater Village. And back then, a lot more intense with the gang issues. So working with trusted leaders to bring people together, to convene weekly on their own time and schedule, to have conversations and work through consensus about what a vision should be, and then to sell that vision using the funding that we were securing through the state bond. And then also talking to the governor's office about what it would be like if we had a river conservancy, a whole river, a Los Angeles River Greenway that we could do, and we got very close to making that legislative. But when it comes to you were asking about it's a lot. It's a lot. But you were asking about the city leasing from the state and how unusual that was. State Parks doesn't do active recreation, and it was a non-negotiable that we provide active recreation on this site. So we had to work with Jackie Goldberg to come to a solution. She was an assembly member at the time there. And we crafted this agreement that would allow the state to lease the space we needed for active recreation for $1 a year. So it was a lot of things that had never been done before, but we had such agreement among the community on what the vision was, because it came from the community, and it made it very powerful. And in fact, when the local, we didn't have any support from the mayor, and we had no support from any council members. They were all fighting against us. They all, of course, took credit later on.
What was the argument against it?
We had zero support. So Reyes, who is now known as the champion of the river and the visionary, and the city attorney, Rocky Delgadillo, were like, come on, how much park space do you need? We got to develop this stuff. After Prop 13, the way everybody approaches planning is, that's where you get your revenue from, especially from industrial properties, right? And you can say you're going to get jobs, but it's easy to build. And Mayor Reardon at the time had a whole initiative called Genesis LA. And both Taylor Yard and Cornfield, which is now State Historic Park, were sites that he wanted developed industrially. So we not only had no support, we had active, vociferous opposition throughout the entire city of Los Angeles. It was, and now I get told by state legislators, well, unless you have support from the city, we can't move it forward. And it's like, oh, fuck you. But so we had like zero support from our local legislators. And it was a big, huge fight, but we were all, very much willing to sue, which we had to do. And we won at Taylor Yard. They settled at Cornfield, but we won at Taylor Yard, which was amazing. And, they were all like, well, we'll give you a little something. And, meetings with these people were just so frustrating. It's like, look, you're going to do what we say. I'm elected, So it was.
I'm the expert. Yeah, that kind of a thing, right?
Yeah. So I'm not really daunted by that stuff. Especially, I mean, if you do the work, there's just a lot of work of, trusting the community and working through consensus, then you're going to have what you need. And, a good legal team doesn't hurt. So there's, sorry, I probably went up on a tangent and I'm not sure if I answered your question.
I actually think it was interesting. And, you actually unintentionally gave me a segue to what I usually wrap up the interview section of it with anyway, which is I ask people, what do they do when they find personally that they have been putting their lifeblood into the project, and you have been told by everybody no, and you're thrusting your head up against what it feels like a concrete wall, and it feels like all the work you're doing is going to be for naught, and that's sometimes personally very debilitating, very depressing.
Yeah.
And it the question is, what do you do personally, which I've asked everybody in the series, what do you do personally when you come to one of those moments and you have to figure out a way to recharge and regroup and keep going?
Yeah, it varies depending on where I'm at and what the issue is. There's a lot of stuff that, that it's a victory for a while, and then someone creeps in and starts to pull it away and mess it up. And you just have to sit back and go, God, I don't have the energy to go and clean that up. And that's, all over the place. Sometimes I will just take a break, which, serves me from years in the theater. It's that sort of like you do a show and then you're off for a while, and that's okay. I think in most of our society, that's not okay. But having lived that life for decades, for me, it's a good rhythm. So if I need to rest or take a break, that's fine. And often what'll happen is something will come to me that, like, nobody else is looking at this issue, or nobody else is really doing something about this issue. So I'll pivot and pull together partners, and people who are worried about me doing something are not paying attention to me doing this thing over here. And I'll build up enough steam to get something really going. And suddenly they're like, how did you know? And then we go all over again. But there's enough people out there who really do want to do good things that I've been able to thus far find partners to make that work by relaxing, staying open, and then pivoting. But it's different every time. Sometimes it can be, it's just the way things go, and you try and the work is out there. You hope it'll get carried forward. And sometimes there are people who will come along and just go like, well, that wasn't mine, so I think I'm going to take that for you. And those sort of betrayals are rough, but there's a lot of ego out there in the environmental world, and people prioritize, even in the advocacy space, they will prioritize access and credit, but political access is so much more important. These politicians have to love us, if we want to get anything done. And so they'll sacrifice and throw away the most important stuff. And they'll tell themselves, well, but at least we made a baby step. And it's like, you cost us so much money and a decade of time, and we don't have much of either anymore. So get your shit together. So that's me. I have the rage that I can't let go of. And I think it's appropriate to have some rage given what we're facing with climate, because it fuels you, but you also have to endeavor to breathe.
Well, I mean, the one thing that I've seen that is an absolute thing in common with everyone who stays in advocacy for decades, or at least many years, and works on it, is that they find a way to be kind of spiritually irrepressible with, it's, you know, at the end of the day, they find a way to regroup, and doesn't mean they don't have their moments. Doesn't, certainly I have my moments, and I'm not nearly as good at it as a lot of people like you, but it is absolutely something in common with the people who succeed that I take as inspiration, that they find a way to regroup and they find a way to keep going. So that's why I think that's an insightful thing
So
to
I'll
keep
tell
in
you,
mind.
I'll tell you something. When I was first starting to go to the Watershed Council, and I was mentioning those elected, those agency people who just like wouldn't speak up or whatever, a few of them came up to me after a couple of meetings and said, look, don't stop doing what you're doing. We really can't say things because it's representing the agency, but you need to keep saying what you're saying. One of those people, and they would like look at me across the table in meetings like, say it, you know, so that sort of started my whole pattern of this. But one of those people was the head of the Angeles National Forest. Mike was a wonderful man. And when Mike retired, he was the kind of guy who at his retirement party gave other people awards. Mike gave me an award. It was my first award from a government agency ever. And my award was for my tenacity.
That's
So
cool. That's fun. And it obviously made an impression on you here, because here you are many years later recalling it. So you know, that's kind of a sweet story. I want to open this up to the chapter for questions here, because I'm sure a lot of people care about the issues that you've been involved with and have questions for you. So I'm going to open it up now to the general chapter. If you guys could raise your hand and put it in the, it'll come up in the window and I'll throw it to you. So I'll start with my vice chair, Andy, and it's all yours, buddy.
Thank you, Charles. And thank you, Melanie, for your time and for joining us again. I am curious, again, always appreciate your tenacity. Do you think, given the current atmospheric rivers, more extreme rains that we're experiencing, obviously because of climate change, that there will be more movement towards nature-based solutions and things that our chapter, but also the River Project advocates for? Or how do you foresee that going in the future?
right. Great. Thanks for bringing that up. I've been possessed with atmospheric rivers ever since the USGS did their arc storm scenario more than a decade ago. And I think it's really fascinating if you watch the way that these are being reported now, both in terms of how people are talking about it and how people are talking about stormwater. And people out in the community, you'll see comments on stories, or if you ever dive into Reddit, you know, people are like, why aren't we doing more about this? And this could be really great. And then you'll see the agencies going, we're doing great. There was 2 articles out this week saying LA was a great exemplary sponge city. And it's like, the fuck is wrong? No, sorry for my cursing. It's who I am. It's like, you could not be more wrong. And how dare you write this article? But the agencies will try to say that they're doing what people are saying they want done. It's very frustrating because I'm seeing a lot of people, even in the activist space, say, yes, we need to do more for stormwater. There's got to be more large projects out there. It's like there aren't really more, except for Sepulveda Basin, there aren't more large projects out there. This is about doing small projects everywhere. And it's not about what we used to call green infrastructure, which they're now rebranding as nature-based solutions. The point of calling them nature-based solutions is to differentiate them from green infrastructure. There's one leading environmental advocate who this week did an interview saying they're the same thing. In print, kill me. And the agencies want you to believe that. They're very different. And if we don't define our terms very specifically with these people, they're just going to keep building, pouring more concrete and steel and doing the same thing they've been doing and then throwing some landscaping on it and calling it what we want. So it's really important for advocates to hold very firm when these terms are defined, because they will throw this crap around and try to make you think they're doing it. We need to, in order to handle and address heat, biodiversity, soil carbon, all the things that we need to address, the systems things, you have to have the nature-based solutions, not the green infrastructure. So building a community that understands those differences and will call them out when they're wrong is really important. Being able to say, that's not it. We want that, and here's why. And the more people that do it, the better chance we have.
That's a great answer.
Thank you, Melanie.
Just so everybody knows, while I'm busy blathering on with my mouth for this whole meeting, I don't really keep track of what's in the chat. So if you put a really cool question in the chat, sorry, haven't been monitoring. I'm going to try to scroll back and catch some of them. But if you could just raise your hand, that'd be a lot easier because I'm not organized enough to do it. So
It's okay,
I'm going to
Charles.
go
There
with
aren't any
Elise, and then
questions in
Todd.
the
Did you
chat.
raise your hand? Oh, it looks like you did raise your hand. So, but no, I'm kidding. I'm going to go with Elise. You're up next for a question for Melanie.
Yes, I was just curious as to what role, in your estimation, what role do native plants play in your advocacy for biodiversity, and what you see as like the most positive way forward to incorporate them?
Oh my goodness. Well, we've been advocating for native plants for a very, very, very long time. There's so many reasons here in Los Angeles to push for them. It's not just biodiversity, even though that would be, top of the list here. But they don't need the water inputs. Their roots tend to grow deeper, which helps with soil carbon sequestration and helps to stabilize hillsides. They smell great. They look beautiful. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Not just biodiversity. It's silly to say just biodiversity because it's such a critical component of our ability to survive in the next century. But it does go on. And I'll say that when we have done projects in communities where we have been able to implement like a lot of natives or park spaces where this happens, people do mention like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing butterflies, I'm seeing hummingbirds. This smells amazing. This smells like something that should be familiar to me, and it's transporting me. And these colors are happening at different times of year, and who knew? And people have this very different kinds of reactions to natives, and so they resonate spiritually and personally with people beyond the long list of water, saving us on a lot of water and helping to stabilize slopes and helping to infiltrate stormwater and building healthier soils.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely. Anybody else? Anyone else want to throw in another question? In absence of any raised hands, I'm going to ask you something that I wanted to ask and I ran out of time on it. What is it that I'd kind of like to say, just in broad terms, when you look out at Los Angeles and see what's happening in environmental advocacy, and you're involved in a number of groups, and you interface with a lot of different components of the advocacy that's happening in LA. What do you think is being done today that just is wrong in terms of our advocacy that we just don't get? And then the converse of that would be, what are we doing that's right that we need to double down on? So,
oh goodness, gosh, I think I'm always advocating for more systems thinking and more intersectionality across issues. I get most frustrated with the water world because they really have their heads up their butts with the focus on just TMDLs, and occasionally water supply.
And
but
TMDLs,
TMDL.
for everybody who is not familiar with that term, TMDLs are?
Total maximum daily loads. So it's the way in which you measure water quality. But you do that and you get stuck in the water column and you get stuck in, well, machines can fix that. And you get so focused that you don't see that if you have more nature-based solutions, if you have soil water interactions and plant interactions, you're going to get better water quality along with all these other things. But if you just keep focusing on your TMDLs, you're going to get stuck in stupid stuff. So that's like with the water world, they just can't get their heads out of their butts on that. And I think just the avoidance of complexity. I think you need to embrace complexity.
And what are we doing that we're doing right?
Well, you're doing right. I think I see in some spaces, I see people holding meetings where they're facilitated such that everyone gets a chance to speak. Now, this isn't everywhere, but I see it in the youth a lot. They structure their meetings that are in ways that are more inclusive to ensure that everyone is heard, to encourage people to talk. And I think that there is a new and nascent movement towards getting at structural issues, and sometimes it's not along the standard pathways. Governance reform is an example.
Fair enough.
if that helps.
Yep, no, absolutely. We had a couple people withdrew their hands. We still have some time, but Dave, you're up next with your hand up.
Yes, Melanie. What do you think about
Dave.
Measure W? Hi, how
Hi.
are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you
Say-
too.
What do you think of Measure W? Is it working?
We had such an opportunity with Measure W. And just before it crossed the finish line, some people really made compromises that have cost us dearly. And I will try to say quickly what I think the biggest flaws are. Some of the biggest flaws were in the definition they accepted of nature-based solutions, because we haven't seen nature-based solutions in the projects that have come through, although almost all of them are defined as nature-based solutions. And we had a good definition, and a person who shall not be named had a particular interest and decided to use their political power to undermine that. And we haven't fixed it yet. So that's why we're seeing a lot of concrete and steel. It was sold to the community as nature-based solutions and community benefiting solutions. And those are the two things we've seen the least of. It's been a lot of stuff that was sitting on the shelf. It's been a lot of concrete and steel. We were supposed to be reducing hardscape in Los Angeles 30% by 2037. We saw a net reduction in hardscape in Los Angeles County of 5 acres.
I want to just jump in
the first $1
really
billion.
quickly I want to jump in really quickly for anybody who is watching this and is not familiar with it. Measure W was a 2018 ballot initiative that today most of that is being done under something called the Safe Clean Water Program. And so that's kind of the framework for what we're discussing right here.
Yeah. So there's money that comes every year from your taxes, and it's based on your impervious surface cover on your property. And it's not enough, but it should have been higher. There's a list of things that we had the opportunity to do right, but people compromised at the end of the day, and here we are. And I don't think that it's going to change until, the political will from the supervisors can help, but I think the leadership at Public Works itself is going to need to change. So yeah, it's a real lost opportunity, and the measure has run out of steam because the agencies have run out of projects on their shelf. Yeah, I could go on, but everybody else.
I felt it a little bit last night and the day before, but it's like worse today.
Kent, could you mute, please?
Okay, but not right now. Bye.
Hi. Whoever Kent's daughter is.
Yeah, Michael, could you mute everybody? Michael, you're the if you could, buddy, I'd appreciate it. All right, Lisa.
Hi, I'm wondering why you won't name that person, because I'd like to know who that person is.
Andy Lipkus.
Oh. Ooh.
Google him if you want to know who Andy is. I don't want to get in the middle of that conversation right at the end of the interview here. So I'm going to give time for one last question, and then we're going to wrap this up. Does anybody else have one that Todd's been twice you've raised your hand and brought it down. Now you're okay. All right, then we'll go ahead and move on to wrap it up. But Melanie, thank you so much for doing this. I can't underscore that enough. We really appreciate your work for the community, for the city, for the environment, for life on Earth, and all of that you have put into it, but also for your willingness to come here tonight and talk to us and spend some time with us, sharing a little bit about your journey. I feel like most of the people who are in attendance of this meeting were aware who you were beforehand, and almost without question, they learned things about you that they didn't know tonight. I certainly did. And it was a pleasure, and you're a delight, and we appreciate you, and good job you. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Nice talking with you.